Welcome to the Public Voice Salon. We are an open dialogue on culture and ideas with a particular focus on education, the arts, and social change. And we're here broadcasting today in Bryant Park, New York City with Mr. Peter Osborne. He is the author of this wonderful book called The Talking Revolution: How Creative Conversation Can Change the World. And this is a very special day because this day is known as Conversation Day New York. And we are gathering dozens and dozens and maybe even hundreds of New Yorkers are gathered here in Bryant Park, along with cities across the world, 40 cities across the world. There is a talking revolution going on, and this man, Peter Osborne, is a big reason for this revolution. And this really speaks to my heart, Peter, because I call myself an activist of conversation. Right. Whether it's in the classroom as an educator or creating these groups in the world, it seems that there's a crisis in conversation today. Yes. You know, we walk into cafes and people, instead of engaging in conversation, they're on their laptops, and the cafes have become quiet, you know. And you think with all the problems in the world, if people would start coming together and engaging in dialogue, we might have a step towards solving those problems, and also in terms of personal happiness, that conversation makes us happier. Why don't you just begin, Peter, and share with our audience, you know, what is it that got you excited about conversation and dedicating yourself to writing this book and bringing people together in conversation?
Okay, well, hello everybody. And thank you very much, yes. John. I started with this subject because of a problem. And the problem was that I grew up in a family, very nice family. My parents were great, but nobody ever talked to anybody else about anything of any importance. You know, I don't know if your family may be like that. I've met several that are. And it was very frustrating to me. Everybody was very responsible and very nice, but if something came up about how you felt about something, it was things were swept under the carpet. Nobody wanted to talk about it. The subject was changed. And the more important something was, like, for example, my mother had agoraphobia and didn't go outside the house for 15 years, but nobody talked about it. So this was a source of big frustration for me, which, as you might imagine. Years later, I met a guy called Professor Gerard Egan, who's an American professor, lives in Chicago. He wrote a book called The Skilled Helper in the 1970s, which is about skills of psychotherapy for psychotherapists. But a very large part of it was about how people communicate. And I was working with Jerry and Andrew Bailey, another guy, on making resources to deliver these skills to school children and school teachers. And in working with them, I came to realize two things. The first thing was that there was an answer to this problem that my family had. It wasn't just something we all had to live with. There are things that you can do to change your family culture. And the second thing I learned was these problems are everywhere. Yes. Once you start to look, you know, in workplaces and in families and in marriages and in governments and everywhere.
Communities also.
And in communities. Yes. The fact that we have these incredible powers of being able to understand each other, yes?
Yes.
And of being able to express ourselves to each other and think about how each other feels and everything. But very often we fail to use them to anything like the power that they have. And then you got two problems. One is you got a problem, whatever it is, climate change or a situation at work. And then you've got the problem that whoever it is doesn't listen to you, or always just tells you what they think, or goes off on tangents all the time. And very often it's the second problem, I think, the problem of how we communicate, that is most annoying. You know, I mean, people are often saying, "Ugh, you never listen to me," or don't they?
Right, of course.
How common is this? It's everywhere. Yes. And in fact, we could all do something about that. We all are capable of listening more if we make the choice. And so we wrote this book to try to persuade more people, you know, to do to do more of that. So that's how we are where we are sitting here today in Bryant Park talking to each other.
Wow. Just trying to think of how I started with this as an English teacher. Beginning my career in 1997 as an English teacher, I began to see that in my classrooms, this is what really is a big issue in education, getting people to open up and to be able to communicate. I began to become aware of the work of certain people like Carl Rogers, the psychologist, who talks about the healing power of non-judgmental listening and discourse, and Martin Buber, who talks about the sacredness of the I-thou relationship and dialogue. So I just became very focused of all the things that excite me about being an educator, which, literature, the power of art and all that stuff, politics, making a better world. Somehow conversation became at the center of it, And I found that those skills and capacities of conversation that you can learn in school can be applied immediately in the world, in one's personal life, in one's community, and also in politics. So I created an open dialogue group in the town of Hoboken, which is where we live. This was in 2002 at the Symposia bookstore. And with the owners of the bookstore, it was every Wednesday night. Anybody could come. It was completely open. We served healthy food. We were supposed to meet from 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. Very often we would stay till 10, 11, sometimes after midnight. And it was like, it became this phenomenon. And I really see the power of it. But you really, in writing this book, you make it very clear in terms of the principles, in terms of things like how to have a sense of managing your conversations, how conversations can be reframed. And I just want to read this, and as soon as I'm finished, I want to reread it, and I want to keep reading it. I want to really sort of imbibe the wisdom of it. But maybe you could share with our audience some of the principles of having better conversations that people can apply. Like, what does this mean to have a conversation manager? What does that mean?
Okay, well, the first thing I want to say is thank you very much for reading the book, which you clearly have. And the second thing is, none of these things that we've included in the book, we didn't make this thing up. We just tried to learn from huge amount of wisdom which already exists out there in the world. We learned a lot from Professor Gerard Egan, who I've done a huge amount of work with in the past. He himself was a student of Carl Rogers. So, there's a direct connection with what you were saying there. Yeah. And then there are also principles that you get from non-violent communication, for example. The thing about really striving to identify the needs that somebody else is expressing when they're talking to you, rather than just the words that they're saying. And also to help to understand what your needs are in a conversation, because very often when conversations don't go well, there's something about our needs not being met. And so that all comes from Marshall Rosenberg and nonviolent communication. We've also derived some principles from Buddhism and various other places. And fundamentally, what we've done is we have boiled down the best of what we could find into 3 principles and 3 practices that absolutely anybody can just pick up and use immediately and apply to a conversation with somebody that matters to you.
A conversation you might be having that's going off the rails and you want to try to put it back on track, or shape it, reshape it in process.
That's right. Or indeed, a conversation that has never happened but you really think needs to happen. All of these things. And so basically, there are these 3 principles that we're talking about very, very briefly. 3 principles are about first of all, personal responsibility. You are at the center of your world. The way you talk to other people or fail to, or the way you seek to understand other people or fail to, has an enormous impact on your relationships. So if you want to change your relationships, change the way that you communicate with people, and things will start to move. But basically, it's not their fault. It's not their responsibility. Your relationships are your responsibility, regardless of, other people may listen, they may not listen, they may do this or do that. That's not something you can do anything about. But what you can absolutely do something about is your behavior. Put yourself in the driving seat. Be responsible. I mean, that's the first principle. which, you know, just on its own is an incredibly helpful shift. If you're always blaming other people, for example,
Correct.
which many of us so often do. And then the second one is about, you know, openness. Be open to other people. Be open to other people's ideas. You know, sometimes with some, it seems like some justification, we can become so closed. You know, I'm this kind of person, you're that kind of person, you're not like me.
Right.
But we already know what we already know.
Right.
And there is huge advantage just to opening our hearts and our minds to other people and other ideas and really striving to understand them. So that's really about, openness is really about our attitude to other people. Yeah, and then the third one is creativity. You know, when you have a conversation, you can make something great happen. You can create value, you know. I mean, even if it's
for you and the other person, value for everybody involved in that conversation.
You can just try to make sure that whether you agree or disagree doesn't really matter, but that you come out of it stronger than you went in. Yes, you've cemented the relationship a bit more, even if you still completely disagree. You've listened in ways that have opened the other person up. You've thought together. You've made something better happen. So that's the whole thing about creativity, creating value with people. So I think, you know, if you have those three principles going, you're already a more responsible, more open-minded, a more creative person than you were before.
And what
those are the three principles that we're trying to really encourage.
What advice would you give, Peter, for people who dominate conversations? Because we see, do you think people who do that are insecure and they just want recognition, or?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to start analyzing anybody. But what I can do, but in a way, that's kind of about them. What we can do, and this comes to the thing that you were talking about just now, about managing conversations. You know, you can, if there is somebody who's always dominating, for example, you can invite yourself in. You can, and I've done it many times. You can respectfully, and I had to do it with somebody quite recently, actually, say,
how did that go?
Well, actually, it went much better than his wife thought it was thought it was going to, because he's somebody who tends to, you know, like, he likes to talk and he likes to tell you that he knows a lot, you know. And he was telling me a lot of stuff about things that he knew a lot about, but after about 10 minutes it's been going on, and I had to say, can we hang on? You're saying quite a lot of things, and I haven't spoken for the last 10 minutes, and if I don't ask you about some of the things, it's like having, you know, too big a meal. I can't eat all of this. You have to give it to me in smaller chunks, and also I need to reflect on some of the things that you're saying. So maybe you could listen to me for a little while, and I can tell you, we're still talking about your subject, but I just want to invite myself in and talk about some of the things that you're saying. And actually, our conversation, my heart was pumping a little bit, because it can be quite, it can feel a little bit daunting to do that. But amazing. But if you do, then at least you open up the possibility that something good can happen. And in this case, we had a much better conversation after I stopped it. Well, if you let somebody go on and on, I mean, that's kind of your problem. You're the one that's suffering.
Right.
What are you going to do about it? You know? So there are many things that you can do. You know, I mean, another aspect of managing conversations, for example, is just this thing about thinking, is this the right time? Is this the right place?
Right.
Do we need to wait a little while before we talk about this, or should we talk about it now? All of those kind of considerations, you know, because if something's important and it matters to you, finding a time and a place that's conducive to you having that, you might need to have that conversation in private, for example, and right now there are a lot of people around. Or somebody might not be in the right emotional state to have it. So again, this is part of taking responsibility and thinking, if I want to talk to this person, I'm going to make sure that the conditions are right to give ourselves the best chance of having a conversation. And the other thing about managing conversations is all the stuff that's going on in your head all the time. You can very easily, somebody can be telling you something. Have you ever done this? Very, very interesting. But there's another conversation going on over here at the next table that sounds really interesting. And you're distracted. And so one of the most important thing about managing conversations is, you know, be present with that person. Talk with them now. Never mind all the other stuff that you've got to think about, for later. Be present in that moment and have that conversation well. And that includes the right time, the right place, being in, making sure that they're not too distracted by other things that they have to do, inviting yourself in, or maybe inviting them in. Some people don't like to talk at all and sometimes need to be kind of invited. I've spoken a lot about this, but I really want to know what you think. All of these things, it's a big subject, but fundamentally, if you just try to concentrate on being open-minded, taking responsibility, and trying to make something creative and good happen, all those other things quite naturally start to float because you care about the other person.
Thank you so much, Peter. I just want to be clear now to everybody, to you and everybody. This is not a real conversation we're having. I would love to have a real conversation with you at some point because well, I don't know, possible. We could maybe figure it out. But what we're doing now is we feel that the knowledge that you have is so valuable and vital that we just want to. This is sort of a series of mini lectures just to get this up because Americans need to know this. Peter, we now have a president of our country, of the United States of America, Donald Trump, who does exemplify a lot of those kind of the wrong way of going about conversation. He tends to dominate. He tends to pontificate a lot. He was just in England. He was in your country. But let's see what advice you could give to Donald Trump. I mean, is he somebody who could... Well, we've got a loud motorcycle going on in the background. I don't know if that was symbolic of something. But what advice would you give to someone like a Donald Trump that he could change, maybe? Is that possible?
Well, I think that, Donald Trump is one of a number of people who have a very particular way, shall we say, of going about things. And Donald Trump's power, and the power of other people who have, unusual ways of going about things, they only have any power to the degree that we all give them that power. Yes? We all support them. If nobody supported Donald Trump, he wouldn't have any power. He could just be some other guy who's walking down the street right now. I think that the most important thing for all of us, we have Brexit in the UK, we've got a similar kind of hugely divisive, incredibly important issue. And there's a way in which our political views might be this or they might be that. I don't know whether I would have any advice for Donald Trump, but what I would say is that for the rest of us, it's so important that we don't allow those divides of different opinions about whether you support that person or this person. We don't allow those differences of opinion to create divides in our society. And there is a huge way in which that's happening now in the US, isn't it? So, I know a number of people with whom I have radically different political views. But if we do the kind of things that we're talking about and that you're trying to promote...
Can you hear? Okay.
Yeah?
Okay.
Oh, yeah. If we do the kind of things that we're trying to promote, of seeking to understand people before seeking to be understood by them, which is a huge point that Stephen Covey makes in his books. Yeah. If we do that, then we can establish really great relationships with people who think very differently from us. And the fact that we disagree is almost neither here nor there. If everybody thought the same way, the world would be a much poorer place. Our greatest resource is each other, and the fact that somebody thinks differently from you can be a fountain of really great growth for you, to try to understand why they feel how they feel, what's behind that view. And if I simply wait for them to shut up so that I can tell them what I think, I'll never know what led them to think the way they do.
Wow. So, just to reciprocate and to be a little vulnerable, I also grew up in a family where I found it very difficult to find my voice. Yeah. It was a patriarchal structure. My mom and dad, who I love very dearly, who are now in their late 70s, they got married very young, and they had 3 kids. My dad never went to college, so there was a lot of work, sort of maybe a sense of working hard, coming home, and those silences at the dinner table that you become sort of it becomes part of your inner strata.
Yeah.
And it takes years of psychoanalysis to get over that, to overcome that. When I look at someone like a Donald Trump, and I agree with Howard Stern. I don't know if you know Howard Stern. Yeah. He was in a conversation with Anderson Cooper last week. They had a dialogue, and he advised Donald Trump to seek psychotherapy for those issues. When you look, for example, at the Trump cabinet meeting and how it's structured, where everybody just goes around and worships the king, there's not a conversation.
No.
So I think someone like him and people who are like that, they are missing out on so much magic and so much wonder of conversation that can happen in your life. And so as a talk show host, what we're trying to do with our show is to really spark this conversational revolution. We look at shows like the Johnny Carson show, which was about conversation. I grew up watching it. I remember watching it with my dad, and strangely enough, like, we were both very happy whenever the Johnny Carson show was on. There was something about the interactive aspect of it. We actually got to meet Joe Franklin. You might not know him. He created the first TV talk show in 1950.
Really?
And in some way, I feel like he passed the baton to me, because I was his last interview. And and that stuff. So we're trying to reimagine the talk show as a more conversational, not a celebrity worshiping thing, but more of a real interactive dialogue. What advice would you give for us in our TV show, Public Voice Salon, to have better conversations in the world?
Well, I think the classic thing about, I've always thought the classic thing about a great interview is that it is a conversation. That people go, and in order for it to be a conversation, you need to just kind of bounce the whole thing backwards and forwards, and not, some interviewers, I've worked with some students at school who are learning how to interview, and what they typically do is, write a list of questions and ask the first question, and then it's answered, and then you say, all right, what's my next question? Very formulaic. Whereas, I've always thought that a good conversation is more like a dance. You dance together. You move together. You look at the same thing together and say, I see it like that. Do you see it like that, or do you see it slightly differently? And so I think that the spirit and of what you're doing now is great interviewing, because it is a model of the kind of thing that you want people to do anyway. So you're kind of exemplifying it, whilst at the same time kind of opening the subject up and trying to help people be better informed, maybe about different aspects of it. So I think that's great.
We don't want to get you all talked out now, because the event is yet to start, but I want Claudia to just pan the camera around, darling. Just look around the park, where we are. We want to situate in time and space. We're in Bryant Park, New York City. This is Conversation Day, New York. It's happening in 40 cities around the country, around the world, I mean. And what are your thoughts on this day? On what are your hopes for this day?
My thoughts on this day is I find it completely inspiring. I mean, there are so many initiatives going on, because a number of people are feeling the same thing right now. Are feeling that people are becoming more, well, not just feeling, people are becoming more isolated. We're better connected than we have ever been, technologically. Everybody in the world's connected to everybody else instantly, and yet people feel more isolated, society becomes more divisive. We just appointed in the UK a minister for loneliness. There is a government department for loneliness. That means loneliness at a time when we're also hyper-connected is a real problem. So to come to your question, my thoughts on a day like today is it is so necessary for people to take initiatives like this. Ron Gross is doing, and his colleagues are doing, a great thing here in New York. We've also been speaking to the National Council for Dialogue and Deliberation. There are many other initiatives that are going on, and this is what people all over the world will increasingly need, because it's the most valuable resource on earth is each other, is our relationships, and to invest in them is what this is doing, and that's why I think this is such a great thing. And thank you so much for the work that you are doing.
Thank you so much, Peter, and I already feel so much more hopeful about my future conversations. From reading your book and from having this interaction with you, I feel much more hopeful for better conversations yet to come with Peter Osborne in Bryant Park. Thank you so much, Peter, for being with us.
Thank you so much, John. Have at least one great conversation today.
Yes. Great.
guidelines. These are our topics. They will be changing at the top of the hour. The only thing we have available currently is a poll. It's directly to the left. You're welcome to join yourself. Hi, and welcome.
So the conversations are in full swing in Bryant Park. Here you see it says Conversation Day, and the topics are risk-taking, happiness, technology, talking across our political divide, oh boy, we need that one, friendship and love, thrive in New York City, and other topics include food, home, trust, laughter, human nature, and self-appreciation. Oh, taking initiative. Here we are. Okay. So here we are with the man of the hour, Mr. Ron Gross, who is an amazing expert on lifelong learning, okay? And he is responsible for what you see here, for these amazing, this outbreak of conversation that's going on in New York City, but also in 40 cities around the world. Ron Gross is the chair of a very, very innovative committee. It's a seminar at Columbia University, very prestigious seminar in innovation. He's the chair of that. He's doing more to bring people together in New York City than I think anybody. And so we're going to give you a few words to speak to our audience and to the world. Why conversation, Ron? Why does it matter? And what are you doing here in Bryant Park?
Thank you, John. Well, it matters because we deeply need these opportunities to come together face to face, not on the internet, not through our various virtual messages, but face to face, body to body, in small groups to share ourselves, our subjects that we care deeply about, our convictions. We have been coming here to Bryant Park for 5 years straight doing this each summer, and we come because this oasis in the middle of New York City is a tribute to the life of the mind, of the imagination, of the emotions. It's in the shadow of a great library. It's in the center of a great city, but it's a place for reflection and conversation. So we love to bring people together to have them have an opportunity to talk about what matters most to them and put down their cell phones for an hour or two. And as you can see from the images that you just saw of how people are talking, it's not I who am doing this because I'm sitting here, I'm with John, yes. Taking a break. It's all of these wonderful people who have shown up ready to share their minds, their thoughts, their convictions, and their hearts, and discover that all of us are smarter than any of us.
Ron, my only question to you now is why are you not on the big shows? Why does not Anderson Cooper call you in and Rachel Maddow? I mean, given how important this conversation is in the country, nobody's talking to each other anymore. You walk into cafes and they're on laptops, people are not talking, and we see more and more there's a connection between the health of a democracy and whether or not people are talking. So why aren't you on the big shows?
Well, your show, The Public Voice, has done more than any that I know of on the media to awaken people to the need and the opportunity for this kind of discourse. So congratulations to you, my friend. I consider being on this program with you as being in the big time. For me, this is the biggest time there is being with you, John.
My head's going to get so big, my hat's going to fly off. I don't know. But so Ron, talk a little bit about how you got involved with Columbia University also in this incredible seminar that you run there on creativity and innovation. Yeah.
Well, our seminar at Columbia is much like these conversations. It's not your standard academic course with credits and degrees and diplomas. Rather, it's a group of people coming together month after month, year after year, to discuss something that's very close to their hearts, innovation, what it really means, how they can participate together, not just as individuals on their own careerist paths. So it's a very different enterprise from most of what goes on a college or university campus.
And you're also, Ron, very much an advocate of lifelong learning. We talk about that a lot on our show, this idea of developmental psychology. We had a Professor Keen Berger, who's a great psychologist, who's an expert on lifelong learning. And whether you're in your 70s or your 80s or even your 90s, you can always be learning something. So let's take a look at that camera and see, maybe the President of the United States could be watching. You never know. He likes TV, right? He does like TV. But what advice, even for a Trump, that you could change, you can grow? Howard Stern the other day, he had on, Anderson Cooper was on with Howard Stern. He says he thinks Trump needs psychoanalysis, which would cause a change and a growth. So what advice might you have for the President?
For the president?
For anybody who wants to learn and grow and change.
I actually now like to go even further than lifelong learning to what I call independent scholarship. And that is the pursuit of some worthwhile subject or topic or skill outside of academic auspices. That is, people who are engaged in studying some scientific topic, some humanistic topic, engaged in some artistic work that is serious and in which they are fully devoted and in which they are making creative contributions, but not as members of a college faculty. And I call that independent scholarship. And it's burgeoning throughout the country. I've written a couple of books about it. There are now associations of independent scholars in most of the major cities. And to my mind, that movement testifies to the fact that any of us can become literally a world expert on a subject that we care passionately about if we're willing to devote the time and effort and energy and skill it takes to do that.
And too often, Ron, we notice that the universities, and I also teach in colleges, that they're focusing narrowly on educating for work, for jobs, and they're taking out the humanities. So I think that your approach and our approach, we should probably team up and figure out how we can get resources in here to transform our education system in our country. What do you think?
Aha, bravo, yes. Well, I think it's going to start, as you've seen here at Bryant Park this afternoon. It's going to start with a popular movement of people realizing that they want to take advantage of each other's skills and capabilities and potential, and that by coming together they can help each other achieve their dreams, rather than signing up for a course or a program of study leading to a piece of paper that hopefully will get you a position that you want. You can start doing it right now, here, today.
You know, the crisis in conversation in our country, and there is a crisis in conversation, is being written about by people like David Brooks in the New York Times. Lots of scholars are weighing in on it, but none of the big shows has ever done a town hall on this. We consider this America's first town hall on the crisis in conversation, and we're so glad that you were here to be with us today, Ron. So you are a great source of inspiration.
Thank you, and so are you, my friend. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we're with Maggie, who was in one of the conversations on the topic of
home. I was on home.
Topic of home, and we got her here for a few minutes just to talk about what her experience of this was and what brought you here to Conversations New York.
I actually came to Bryant Park to be juggling, but someone stopped me and told me about it. So
You're gonna juggle instead. You're juggling words. You're juggling.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I just came over right when it started, and they threw me into one of the last tables. So.
And has this changed your life in some way? Or?
It's definitely great to see that things like this are going on in New York, and I'll be sure to keep tabs on it. But I'll have to wait for some of the more discussions to see how life-changing it is. Yeah.
What do you do for a living, Maggie?
I work as a teacher's assistant at a special education school in the Bronx.
Wonderful. So you studied education.
I actually studied psychology, but yeah.
Ah, well, in a way, conversation and psychology sort of go together. Right?
Yeah, definitely a little, especially interacting with so many people, I'm sure, yeah.
Wow. So what other topics are you looking forward to discuss today? Or?
They had one on happiness and one on like friendships, but one that I'm really interested on is like talking about the political polarization of the country and how we can try to like mellow it down a little bit and have conversations like this more frequently.
Yeah, why do you think people are not talking to each other now in America?
I think there's definitely just a big fear of people shutting down your ideas, and so you retaliate more with shutting down their ideas. So just having conversations like this and knowing that there's a way to kind of try to understand where the other person's coming from and join your ideas where they can meet is probably what I'm hoping to get out of this conversation.
So I'm reading a book by Peter Osborne, who we interviewed to start the segment, who's actually bouncing around here, and he wrote a book called The Talking Revolution, which is unbelievable, like giving ideas about how we can have better conversations, because I am a recovering shy person, I say this all the time, and I'm always trying to learn, and even right now with you having this conversation, we're learning to become better. And so how could this play out in education in terms, since you're in the field? Can we teach people to have better conversations in school?
Yeah, definitely. I would say it probably took me getting to like undergraduate and college for us to start having real discussions where we're not just attacking each other. So I think just starting that when they're younger, getting people to talk about controversial topics, trying to show them you shouldn't be scared to talk about things that people might disagree with you on is definitely something we should be working on just with kids younger than college age, I would say.
Where did you study?
I went to Fordham University in the Bronx.
That's my alma mater, Fordham University, Lincoln Center, go Rams, go Rams, Lincoln Center campus, English major.
Gosh, that's nice.
So we're Fordham people.
Yeah.
You know, our president went to Fordham.
Oh, yes, for a short amount of time,
Very short amount of time. Do you think that, like, what advice for the country could we give in terms of that? Do you think conversation and politics are connected in some way?
I think it's one of the most important things in politics, yeah. Even just seeing like a lot of younger people getting into politics right now and seeing that they're trying to have these productive conversations, I think is really important. I think there's definitely been a culture of just kind of attacking each other. So like starting from the ground up with the younger people coming into it and showing them that conversations are possible opposed to just like arguments. So yeah.
Fantastic. Wow, Maggie. You know, I notice a lot of times now I walk into cafes and I see people are quiet, they're on laptops. Do you think that the computers in some way have also played into this, and everyone's on Facebook instead of face-to-face?
I think it's important. The like internet and the technology age definitely can help you connect to people in certain ways. Like a lot of people, I'm sure, found out about this through the internet. But I think it's just important to always be reminding yourself that your life is in like, you know, the living and breathing of the people around you, not just in the technology in front of your face. So just like taking a step back and keeping that to a certain amount of time in your day is probably what's important. Yeah.
Now you say this is your first time on TV?
Yes, my first time on TV. Yeah. Thanks.
How's it going?
It's been fine for me. I hope it's been all right for you guys.
Been wonderful for me and us. Claudia's smiling. My wife Claudia, she's happy. So thank you so much, Maggie, for joining us today. And,
I'm glad you guys are looking into it. It's really an awesome thing that they're doing.
And I want to say this on national television right now, because I also think it's great that a young person has dedicated her life to a noble calling, to psychology, to education, to helping people, not to just being a business major. We see most young people now, they go to business school and they're not. So she's trying to help. She's trying to make a better world, and we really appreciate that, Maggie.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you guys. Have a good rest of the day.
You too. Okay, now we're with Sylvia here in Bryant Park, New York, at the 5th annual Conversation Day New York. It's happening in 40 cities around the world. And Sylvia, what brought you to this conversation today, and what are your thoughts on it?
Okay, well, I got an email concerning this, and it sounded really interesting. It's a way for people to meet one another and to discuss things that, you know, that you don't necessarily always get a chance to discuss with other people. And it was intriguing. I was curious about it, and so I came.
What do you do, Sylvia?
Well, I'm retired, thank goodness. But right now what I do is I volunteer in housing court and also civil court in the Bronx on consumer issues. Yeah.
You're a New Yorker.
Yes.
What was your career?
I used to work for New York State Department of Labor.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, labor is a very important thing. We like to talk about unions.
You know, workplace conflict, why people lost their jobs, and all this kind of thing. Yes.
Communication is a part of all that too.
Yes. Oh yes. Oh yes. Oh yes.
Do you think there's a connection between conversation and democracy?
Oh yes. 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 Oh
in some way?
It's the freedom. It's the freedom to exchange ideas. That's very important. But also a tolerance for ideas. Also, for me, it's to try to understand why somebody would have an idea that's so different from mine. It's like, where does that come from? How does that happen? And to try, rather, because so many times, even if we speak the same language, we can't communicate with one another because we don't understand from where we're coming, and we're talking at each other rather than rather than trying to understand, like, how did you come up with this belief, or why do you feel this way, or.
You're someone I would love to have a real rich conversation with you because you seem like you have those capacities already.
I hope so.
What made you such a good talker to begin with?
Well, I was forced to listen as part of my job.
Ah.
Yes, and I think in general, I don't know, in general, like if I can't get my point across, if I can't make myself understood, it doesn't have to be about politics or something like that, I feel very frustrated. I said, what is missing? Why is it that I can't make the other person understand why it's a good idea to follow my advice? Why is that? What is missing? What am I missing? How could I be more effective?
Like a puzzle you're solving together.
Yeah, it's a mystery.
Wow, it's exciting. How did your conversation go? What was the topic of your conversation just now?
Like bridging the political divide. It's overcoming the political divide. But I think that, it's more than about politics, though. Yeah.
More about psychology. Do you think Donald Trump is a good listener?
I have no idea. I think, he did tap into certain people's fears, and in that way, maybe he is.
Yeah, okay, in his own way.
Selectively, yeah. And he knew how to, profit from that.
What advice would you give the country in terms of having better conversations?
I guess for me, I can only talk personally. Like for me, it's like, maybe not be so quick to judge. When you hear something that you disagree with, just ask more questions to find out, how the person arrived at that kind of opinion. That may be more fruitful as a way to engage in conversation.
How are the conversations in your neighborhood or in your community? Do people gather in cafes, and are there places where people gather for conversation where you live?
Well, actually, I'm not so engaged where I live.
Well, where do you live?
I live in Midwood, Brooklyn.
Okay.
Yes, and normally I travel outside of my community, so but I think the people who do live in the community, I think where they do gather, I think it must be synagogues, mosques, churches, that kind of thing.
We go to Judson Church in New York City in the Village, and they have a wonderful coffee hour, and I find it's vibrant and it's
a wonderful idea. Oh, what a great idea.
Churches that have coffee hours are my kinds of churches.
Synagogues or something, yeah, great idea. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You came by yourself today, Sylvia? Or?
My friend Elliot, who's right there.
Okay. Well, any final thoughts on this day and what it means to you?
Well, I think it was a wonderful experience, and I think I'd like to continue it. So I've gotten the information about what goes on at Hunter.
Wonderful so much. Thank you so much, Sylvia, for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, bye.
So here we are with Erica, and Erica is wearing a shirt that says love, love, love on it, okay? So we like that. We like love. On our show, we talk a lot about love. I like to say that we wouldn't even have a show if it wasn't for the love of my wife, because I said to her, I'd love to have a TV show, and she said, okay, let's do it. So having a loving partner, is very important in life. And I also like to quote a philosopher of education, Paulo Freire, who says, we need to teach for a world in which it's easier to love. So you are an ambassador of love here.
Oh, thanks.
Okay. So tell us about yourself, Erica, and what brought you here to Conversation New York?
Yeah, sure. So hi, I'm Erica. I'm a student at UC Berkeley. I'm an undergrad, and I'm here in the city for an internship for the summer, which is what a lot of students do in undergrad. Okay. And this is actually my first week in New York. So
congratulations, you're on TV already. How did that happen? Okay. Wow.
Saw a nice man with a hat.
Okay.
Spreading the love,
Yes, yes.
And I decided to look up a bunch of meetups.
Okay.
I just wanted to kind of get engaged with the city and like meet some people. I really like having conversations. I'd say that's one of my hobbies. And I was thinking like, you know, in my university we have conversations all the time. And you know, I wanted to look for a way to continue like that level of engagement, but in a new city. So this looked like a great event. So I just decided to check it out.
So if you were to think about your own biography in terms of in conversations, right? How did that develop and evolve in your life? You know, were you as a child, like who were the influences of Erica as a talker and listener?
So I think definitely first and foremost would be my family. My parents are very nurturing. I definitely grew up in an environment that encouraged conversation, and also I was raised to sort of say like what I believe and kind of stand up for that. And I'm really grateful for that, for my family. And I think I don't know if that's necessarily changed, but it's definitely been reinforced as I've gotten more and more education and met more and more people that have inspired me to keep doing that.
So now that we have you on our show, a woman studying economics and politics, what advice might you have for the country to get its political and economic act together, so to speak?
That's a really hard question. I mean, I don't know. I think on a small level, just really engaging with ideas and going beyond like what you initially see in another person or another belief, even if that may be difficult at first. I think like approaching people who are far from you ideologically or like locationally, or like in any way, the same way you would approach someone who's close to you, would be a great start. Like seeing them as a complicated and nuanced person who has something to say and reasons for saying that, as opposed to kind of like putting labels on people initially and then like blocking out aspects of them because of that. So I mean, that I don't think that's gonna like save the world or anything, but that's something that we can do like on a day-to-day basis. And I was just talking to this woman in the group for the group Thrive in New York City. She has these wonderful little cards that she hands out on the bus or like around that are just like
show it so Claudia can zoom in on it. Yeah, okay, yeah. Cool.
And basically she just hands them out to people who are doing nice things, and she gives them a pencil. So I think that's a really great idea, you know, ways to like engage with the community more.
Well, one of the things about UC Berkeley, Robert Reich is there.
Yeah.
I happen to love Robert Reich. I think he gives the best analysis of wealth inequality of anybody I've seen. I haven't seen him on the big shows in a while. I'm wondering what's going on. We always like to see more of him. But what is your conversational life like at school and the campus? And I mean, UC Berkeley has such a great reputation of being a progressive school. And how do those conversations play out in school?
So I'm proud to go to a school that's very progressive, and I really love engaging with my peers. I think like when I think about like the most defining moments for me in college, they've all involved conversation in some way, especially like conversations with my roommates, like late night talks about, you know, all sorts of things, like, you know, which economic system is best for the world, ranging to like, oh, why do we have, you know, different opinions on rules? Like, why do we, you know, approach issues in different ways, and like really like going in depth into that. And I like really like that dialogue across the campus too. And I think like the courses in the social science departments especially are like really, they encourage us to really like critique and question everything, which, you know, when we bring that back to our families, maybe a little bit annoying at times, but I think it's a really important lens to have, and like that's not to say like we're now, or like I am now like really discontent with the world because I'm like, wow, everything's so problematic, but being able to kind of see things through a critical lens, I think is really important, and that's something I'm grateful to Berkeley for.
Well, actually, I also went to NYU. I went to a very forward-thinking program for English education that's like light years ahead. And I found it, too, that difficult when you go back to your family and you're with people and you're on this cutting-edge thing. And you got to be careful in how you talk to people and not be so, you know, high, you know, theoretical and stuff like like that. But do you ever find yourself in arguments, or like what happens when people get angry, and can that be diffused? And what about your own situation? Do you ever find yourself getting angry when you speak to somebody?
Yeah, so that's something I've been actually working on for the past few years. I think my first year of college, it was really hard because we were learning all these social theories for the first time, like, you know, like what you mentioned, like inequality in the US, and being like, wow, like how can anyone be so blind to this, and like kind of developing this sort of one-track mind of like, well, there's so much wrong with this, like if you don't see it, then like you must be like a worse person or something like that. But I think like coming with this sort of like acknowledging like the nuances of people, I've tried to reduce the number of topics that get me emotional, and like really try to analyze like the worth of the argument instead of the person. And like I think intellectual arguments are really fun, but it gets really out of hand when like character gets attacked, and like people are just trying to like label someone and being like, well, you only think that because like you don't understand this because you're like this and this identity. But I think that can be really damaging, and instead like I think it's important to like try to control our emotions in situations like that, even though that's like definitely easier said than done. And like, you know, I think in the political climate now, like oftentimes people feel like their identities themselves are being attacked. So of course, like it's really hard to engage with like the people that you think are attacking you. But I think it has to start somewhere, right?
Amazing. I mean, you are such a proficient speaker. I could easily see you giving lectures and at some point. And what is your dream? I always like to ask young people, even as an educator, I like to say, what is your dream? We ask the world, what is your dream? I think too often today people have given up on any kind of a big dream. They sort of get caught up in the grind, right? Where you have to make a living and you forget what the big dream is. And big dreams include a world without war. You know, back in the 60s, young people had those big dreams that were percolating, but I think the 60s are still at Berkeley. They haven't given up on that, you know, dream. So what?
I hope not. Yeah.
What are some of your dreams?
I think like, you know, like everyone, like I hope for a better world. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like. I think it starts with critiquing and developing theories, but I think oftentimes when someone says things like, oh, well, we can think about like a fundamental shift in the way that our world is set up, and then we often get pushback like, well, what's the alternative? And I think like, well, we don't know what it is yet. We have to come up with it, because every time that's happened in the past, like it's been, you know, people engaging with ideas and movements going on and building up to a change. So I think I would love to live to see that sort of change and be part of it.
Part of it. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's.
Closer, okay.
Oh, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, that's something that I think is really special about my campus and cities like New York. Is I feel like the energy is really working towards something like that, and like people want progressive change. Like people want a better world, and like I believe that we can do that if we, you know, start with engaging with each other. So that's a big dream, I guess.
Wow.
And then more personally, I guess, like, I'm hoping to, like, eventually probably, like, run a nonprofit or, like, manage some sort of organization in the social sector.
I think people are just tired because, like, I actually ran for president twice.
Really?
Yeah, twice. I was calling on a 25-hour work week because I think people are just overworked, you know. I think if we had better education and more time, people would be able to develop their conversational capacities and do what we're doing, you and I. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think I think it's a good idea to have options. I think some people like the 40-hour work week, some people don't.
Okay.
But I feel like, it would be great to live in a world where, you know, there are some organizations that have different work schedules and you can kind of pick like what your preference is.
Yes.
I definitely firmly believe in education, but with education also comes greater inequality. So there's that trade-off between providing more education versus already selecting for people who had been destined to succeed anyways. So definitely more, hopefully like more public education and like in a more like equal way forward.
Okay. So Erica, as we sign off here, let's do a little rah-rah for conversation, because that's what the show is all about. And what's going to be, in terms of conversation, what did you learn? What do you take away? And how do we celebrate conversation going forward?
Yeah, so I think like having a great conversation to me is kind of like reading a really good book or listening to a great podcast. It's like you get to get a glimpse into someone else's reality, which I think is really special, because we are like ultimately only individually conscious, and like you never really know what someone else is thinking and like what their experiences have been. So I think it's really great to be able to hear those stories and like sort of develop yourself based on the people around you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thanks to my darling wife Claudia, who's filming us, and her love and support for the show and for the power of conversation. We're grateful for this as we go forward into the world, and we say to our audience, do this at home. Do this
at home.
Okay? And in your cafes and in your communities, talk to each other. Shut off the TV, unless our show is on, and talk. Okay? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're with Liz Cohen now, and Liz, we were able to get her for just a minute and a half because she's so busy. She is running this whole thing. And tell us a little bit about the experience, Liz, of Conversation Day New York so far for you today.
So it's been pretty amazing. As you know, we're over capacity with New Yorkers who want to engage in public conversation with one another, talking about topics that matter to people that live here in New York and globally. So it has been a sellout event, and we could not be more thrilled to this beautiful day in Bryant Park.
Yes.
And we have so many tables of people in conversation with one another. So it's great.
And your dad, Ron, is the main organizer of this.
Yeah, Ronald Gross is the main organizer of this event. This is our 5th year in Bryant Park, but as you know, we're monthly at Hunter College, and it's been an incredible day.
Yes, and you're doing such a great job over there at that table. I hope you'll actually have time for some conversations.
Exactly. I hope to have good conversations myself. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
All right, good.